introduce you to Wojtek Kaczynski, who is on this call and is now the CEO of the National Imaging Facility and will continue the great work that NIF does. My role at HERF and also at TRI continues in collaboration in the imaging space. I work across 2 universities and 3 hospital systems to develop collaboration in this space. But today I really want to talk to you about a project that was established between 2 of the national imaging facilities in Australia, the Australian Research Data Commons, which controls the research capability, and the National Imaging Facility across a wide range of academic partners. And that's around a system for federated data. And that's something we've talked about a lot within global bioimaging, and it's been part of one of the tenets of global bioimaging from the beginning about growing collaboration. In the past, we've talked about the opportunity to do multi-site studies, big data, and promote collaboration. But I think there's some new things on the block now, and that is we've got to think about the pandemic and the consequences of that. There are researchers having to use remote acquisition. We're needing to share in a virtual environment. We're all used to doing Zoom calls for conferences, but we're also having to use virtual environments for our research. And so we need to be able to manage those data sets when we can't actually go into the lab and collect the data. And even in the human space, we see that happening. So this federated data I'm talking about is largely in the clinical space, but also could be used for preclinical and microscopy. But in that clinical space, we're restricted by how many people can be in the lab at any one time. Often it's just the operator and the patient and people to care for the patient. So the actual imaging scientists can't actually be there. And the other thing that's happening is, and we talked a lot about this yesterday, is that we need to start a lot more in democratizing biomedical research. And I think a lot about, moving patients was always hard. Now it's impossible with COVID. But we also want to be able to reach out to remote and disadvantaged populations, whether they be in Africa or South America, or even in remote Australia. How do we ensure that our Indigenous populations are also included down in research? And so a lot of that requires us to think about how we're going to properly curate data. And many of us were part of a paper on best practice in data curation, led by Zuishi and Jason, and it was a privilege to be part of that. We want to extend that to what we're doing in my biomedical data space. So the Australian Imaging Service is a national platform, but could be international, and I'll show some examples for imaging data and collaboration. It's about integrating clinical devices with viewers. It's about secure data management, access, but also in the human space, we have to ensure that it properly de-identifies data, and that's not simply taking off their name and address. We need to provide accessible viewing for those researchers that don't have access to the high power computing that might exist in our laboratories where we acquire the data. And importantly, we want to ensure reproducibility through automation and one-click pipelines and reports. So this is the current federation. The blue dots are the actual nodes where we store data. The pink dots are the clinical sites that are being set up to contribute data to those nodes. In fact, we've gone broader than that. And we now have some international projects where we have clinical sites in Europe, in Southeast Asia, and in North America, or even establishing an AIS node in Europe to support that research. And that's the overseas work at the moment is really about a multiple sclerosis project, MS-based imaging repository. So the federation is more than just about storing data. It's about connecting those edge devices, providing a data portal, connecting the data, both the original data and the processed data, and also collecting metadata as we go so that we can properly curate and share that data, ultimately publish it and make it fair. Of course, how do we do that across infrastructures, across many institutions and across countries? Because all of us are going to have different types of infrastructure. It's a very heterogeneous environment. So the system is being built around Kubernetes, and that can be provided either as a service or people can install it on their own system. And the code base is made available across all our nodes, and all our code will be in the public domain. It's a requirement of the ARDC that funding and the Australian government that funding of this type of project leads to open source data. But by doing it this way, we've got continuous integration and continuous deployment across anyone that is able to support a Kubernetes environment. So this one tells us about how the data is transferred. Most of our data in the clinical space comes as DICOM data, so it comes off the instrument DICOM. We process it with a RSNA approved clinical trials processor, which ensures the data is properly curated, but also properly de-identified. Sometimes that also means we need to encrypt it, and we store it on an XNAT node. But also we want to connect that with data-centric computing. And so we have a whole range of compute environments, including the characterization virtual laboratory that Wojtek would have talked about if you were at the exchange of experience last year. And so we've developed workflows that go through from checking completeness to that image and metric generation and providing analysis pipelines. So look, as I conclude, I think this demonstrates just where GBI has matured to. It's about bringing imaging communities together and sharing that data, sharing our expertise. And I think a lot of what we talked about yesterday, I hope that we can actually start to integrate some of this in some of the communities that don't have some of the benefits that we do in the developing countries. And maybe later on today during the panel session, we can discuss some of those opportunities. So thank you for listening.